I want to thank everyone for allowing me to speak here. I'm not the expert on ADT. There's some experts sitting out there. I want to draw your attention to the back of the room. Neil Hammerschmidt, he's hiding back there. He helped us craft where we're at today and is helping us to move forward. Aaron Scott is now our new program director for ADT, and he's also in the back of the room somewhere hiding. So these guys, you heard our undersecretary speak on this topic, and I'm going to try to stick to a script that I've written so that I don't vary. Some of the stuff that I have is different from when he talked. So I'm going to cross that out and tell you where we're at from my perspective. So first of all, I heard a lot here at this meeting about government support, government oversight, government concurrence, government helping lead the program. Where we're at in USDA and APHIS and veterinary services is we want to collaborate, we want to work together, we want to help the industry get to where they need to go. We want to build the program that works for the animal health officials that have to regulate the program, that allows them to move animals. We want to build a program that works for the industry and the speed of the industry and the speed of commerce. But we also want to build something that is utilizable for all the different sectors. So we're not going to step out and codify any certain thing. We're looking for the industry and the animal health officials to come to us and tell us where they think this needs to go. So that being said, I'm going to tell you where we're at and a little bit about where I think we need to go. And these are just our opinions. So you know the importance of animal health traceability sort of lies in the area of a high consequence disease. We need to find these animals if they have disease. It's tremendously important that we're able to trace animals in the event of a high impact disease, that we're able to find them for many reasons. One, to stop the movement, stop the disease, and protect those animals that have not been exposed, as well as to develop a vaccine program if we ever have one. The current ADT program, as you know, the other thing I should add is it allows us, in the event of those events, the eventuality to move not only animals but products. So if you watch the international trade market, there are several countries that have FMD and still trade. They still move meat around, they still move animals around, but they're free with vaccine, they're free without vaccine, they have free zones. All that's overseen by OIE, and they give them the status. So those are factors that are continually evolving at the World Health Organizations to tell us where we're going to go with this program. So movement of animals and products. The current ADT program, as you know, covers cattle, does not cover cattle under 18 months of age, and does have some exceptions in the regulations. ADT regulations were published by APHIS, and industry leaders agreed that the importance of putting a functioning basic traceability system in place was more important than a comprehensive approach. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We don't have all the bases covered. So let me talk a little bit about the framework. The framework was defined and established through collaboration with all of our stakeholders, and it was that's how APHIS initiated ADT. We agreed upon a focus that on very basic concepts of traceability, with the understanding that we build a foundation over time, and that when we successfully implemented that foundation, which we referred to as, and some referred to as phase one, that we would move forward with other parts of that ADT regulation. Under the APHIS ADT regulations, animals moved interstate, unless otherwise exempt, have to be officially identified or ID'd and accompanied by an interstate certificate of veterinary inspection, an ICVI as we call it, or other type of movement document, so we know where they went. Since the rule went into effect in March of 2013, the focus of our ADT program has been educating stakeholders about the rules and the requirements, identifying animals, particularly cattle, that has been our focus, with using official ID, collecting animal movement information, and increasing the volume of electronic and searchable records, and finally ensuring rule compliance. ADT is a performance-based program. Both states and tribes have the flexibility to implement ADT in a way that works for them. We track improvements in the traceability through our exercises, known as trace performance measures. These results have shown that we are making some progress in the administration of official ID devices and interstate certificates of veterinary inspection. In 2017, 4 years after implementing the ADT rule, APHIS analyzed the ADT program and how it was designed. However, that analysis showed us that there were many gaps that remained in the ability to trace cattle. One of the statements that Congress asked me is, Dr. Shere, do you have faith in the ADT program? Do you think you can trace animals? My answer to that question, and I believe this, is if an animal has a tag in its ear, I can find where it went, where it came from in 24 hours. If it's not tagged, I can't really tell you much about it. So that's been my answer. And Congress is very interested in our ADT program and where that's going. Various factions on the Hill would like to see a mandatory program. We need to stave that off if we can and continue to work together. The gaps that we talk about, with some animals being untraceable and a lack of traceability to the birth herd, are concerns for Congress. And visual ID tags for cattle are incompatible with the aspects of commerce. They just don't carry the water. Let's talk about some more challenges. I sort of started into that. Well, we're eager to look at additional opportunities to advance traceability. That's what this conference is about. That's what our 9 listening sessions were about. And we're eager to make adjustments in the foundation and principles that we've set up. So, as Glenn said, we carried out 9 public meetings, 9 public listening sessions, which we tend to do a lot of to hear what's out there and what we need to do. Here's some of the things we heard, and this goes along with some of the 14 principles that I'll cover later. First of all, we heard that we need to limit traceability regulation to interstate movements and the currently covered population. There's a real nervousness about expanding into phase 2 and adding slaughter cattle. We heard you. Various exceptions allow flexibility, but many of those are confusing to people and they're difficult to implement. So there's a flavor for starting to get rid of some of those exemptions. While a large number of stakeholders did acknowledge that beef feeders need to be included in the future, the consensus was to address other gaps in the current framework, and such as beef breeding cattle over 18 months of age and all dairy cattle first. Make sure we fix that. Fix what you got first. That makes sense. Before we expand any official ID requirements into feeders, including the requirement for official electronic ID with supporting infrastructure. What we're hearing out there is electronic ID is the way of the future. We have tags out there and tagging systems that don't work in commerce and don't allow me to retire tags. I need to retire tags. If I can't retire tags, I can't tell you much about what the system really does. I say that because many of our disease programs don't happen on the first year, the second year. The traceback system, we've had to trace animals as old as 17 years and try to find out where they went and whether they were slaughtered and if they're still on landscape. So that provides a challenge. We also noted the feedback regarding the need to have uniform uniform enforcement across the industry sector as a whole, particularly private and country sales. Is there water over there that I could hit? Sorry, I don't have the voice I used to. Colorado dries you out anyway, right? Heck of a place. I don't know why anyone would want to live here when you could live in D.C. Little humor, yeah, there goes my credibility. Little humor there. So let's talk about some ADT proposals. A state and federal ADT working group was formed, and Glenn talked about that, in accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, which allows us to go out and listen to people, basically, and talk to them about what their ideas are. And they undertook ADT regulation and a review of that and feedback from the public meetings. And they reviewed the written comments and provided input on disease traceability issues. The working group proposals, and I'll list those in just a second, were based on feedback from the industry and animal health officials on what they thought of the ADT program, where we were currently, and probably where we need to go. The comments were received from those 9 public meetings, and we compiled, and that was in 2017. We compiled those, and let me just run through those. And many of you have seen those, and they've come out. So they include things like to continue to allow interstate movements that do not apply to traceability regulations. Examples: custom slaughter. They want us to continue with those types of exemptions. The cattle population covered in the official identification regulations, they want us to stick with that. Birth premises identification of covered animals. Electronic identification systems for cattle. Administration of electronic records, and this is an area that our Undersecretary really wants us to explore and develop fully. He wants us out of the ID business from a point of what the technology is, that he wants industry to tell us what that should be, with guidance, of course. We don't want 50 systems. We want to limit that so that we can move at the speed of commerce, perhaps have 1 or 2 systems that work for the industry, maybe 3, because I hear from the livestock industry, the LMA folks, we got to be able to read these to move them at the speed of commerce. We don't need 50 readers. I hear you. Enforcement of the ADT regulations, and that has to be equal enforcement. Collection of ID and its correlation to the carcass at slaughter plants. I wanted to speak on that just a minute. One of the rules we're trying to put in place, and you'll see this come across, we have a lot of trouble right now getting rules through the current administration. They don't like rules. But rules that help the industry are rules that we should implement, and this is one that I think will help. Many times when we get an ID tag and it's traced back to a lot or at slaughter, we don't always get to the right animal for disease purposes, which then in traceback terms, you draw a lot around that animal where you think it was, and you test everybody in the lot. It's kind of inconvenient. You may never find the right animal, may never get back to the right farm. What we are proposing to implement is that with FSIS, we give them guidance to include a piece of tissue with all man-made ear tags, especially the official ID, so that in the event that we have a disease tracing instance, we can genetically match the lesions that are turned in with the ear tags that we're seeing is from the animal. That's a step forward. It's something that we have to put into regulation, something that I hope you'll support because it lasers us in on where the infected animals are. Moving on. Public and private information systems. Exceptions for official ID requirements, or excuse me, exemptions for official ID requirements that we look at that. ICVI exemptions and movement documents. Uniformity of state import regulations. Now, I said some of this federally we can handle, some of it we can't. I get calls all the time that tell me, well, in the state of Michigan, they're making us do this. In the state of California, they're making us do this. States have the right to write their own rules. We federally write what we call minimum standards on many of the programs that we have. States can then implement something more stringent. We use them as guidance for them to formulate their programs. But remember this, each state vet, and I don't envy any of them, their jobs, has the responsibility to protect their industry and their livestock within the state. So they try to, within each state, formulate rules, regulations to protect that industry that makes sense for them. So when they're different and you call me, there's not much I can do unless it's in direct conflict with the program we're trying to move forward, and all I can do then is call them. Some of the state laws that get put on the books, they aren't even responsible for. They were there when they got there. So some of that has to be looked at, some of it has to be taken back. I'll be glad to draw attention to that, to the state vet, if I see something like that. And we have had a few instances where that's been a problem, but it's rare. Okay. Official EID tag for imported cattle. And then finally, official identification of beef feeders considered in a separate rulemaking. And I've said all that up to this point. Partnership. I started out by talking about partnership. Anybody that knows me knows I'm big on partnership. I just think it's important that people work together. I've seen the difference that it makes when we work together versus when we're working against each other. Our strategy focuses on providing direction and expertise to the industry and as our partners, but recognizes that all livestock sectors must be at the table to drive the discussions forward. What's the old saying? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I truly believe that's true. You need to have representation in these discussions. It's important that you're part of that, as well as the state animal health regulators. As part of a strategy, we want to increase the overall percentage of cattle that are within the program standards that get identified. And we want to also make sure that records reflect the birth premises. That's important. We need to know where to start. As part of the strategy that we want to move forward with, everybody's talked about electronic ID. Site tags are great for management purposes, but in order for us to retire those tags, we had a project, I got to tell you, where we looked at news tags and retirement of news tags. We set up a little operation at NVSL where we brought all those tags in. People were scrubbing them off, trying to read them, trying to put them in the system. It's a nightmare. Can't do it. You figure there's about 1 million cattle a year that go to slaughter. Try to retire those individually with people looking at numbers. And I said in my last talk that for every 10 tags that people look at, they make a mistake. So 1 in 6 people will make a mistake every 10 tags that they look at. I think it's important that we talk about the technology, but again, as I said before, that's limited best to be built to match what the industry needs. And that's a change. Because as you've watched what APHIS has tried to do, we've had several pilots, and I'll talk about them in a minute, that talk about those types of technologies and what they can and can't do, and we've driven those studies. And we know what they can and can't do, and the industry's told us what they think they need. But we're not going to specify that. We want to hear what you guys think that needs to be. So that's going to take some working together. I've heard about low frequency working in the dairy industry, ultra high frequency for the beef cattle. And some say it doesn't work in the dairy, some say it does. So we're not going to drive that. What we're going to do is assist with the pilots that look at how it works and provide you with that information. That's our job. And once you come to consensus, we'll implement that and we'll build it into our rules. So to me, that makes sense. Neil said he'd throw rocks at me, but he can't throw that far anymore, so That's why I put him in the back. We had him sit in the back of the room. So hopefully, Neil, I haven't destroyed this too badly yet. So what about our strategy so far for technology? I've already talked about what we want to do, but let me talk about what's out there right now. So if we look at low-frequency ID devices, currently, that's the dominant RFID technology for animal identification worldwide. Worldwide, that's what most people are using. Okay? And many of the programs out there worldwide are mandatory. So we're basically getting kept out of certain markets because other countries have better ID programs than we do. And that's a competition base. So mandatory official ID is standard in Canada. And voluntary approved standard in Mexico. That's all low frequency. So low frequency RFID is predominant in the United States currently. It's the highest, it's used mostly in the dairy sector. And it's not only used for ID, it's used for management purposes. Which I've been in a few conversations today, and I think this afternoon there's a lot of stuff going on about additional work that can be, additional services that can be tacked on to the ID system. You've got a McDonald's sitting out there that'd like to know, in a vat of hamburger that's going to be ground up, how many animals are in there, and how can you trace them back to the origins. That's traceability. We've heard a lot about that, and that's where some of this is going. That's beyond what I know or will work on, but I think we need to be realistic that that's where this technology will take us. The biggest drawback in low-frequency ID is the inability for it to read multiple animals, and simultaneously to require that to be done at a stock market or a feed yard. To run those animals single file, that's just not the way they operate. That's where ultra-high frequency comes in and adds additional ideas to what could be done. Now, VS is funding several different studies, and we try to conduct them from a neutral basis. And we're working with states and tribes to collaborate, also with academic institutions, to put these studies together and look at these two types of technology. About the time we figure them out, there'll be something new. And, of course, we'll probably have to look at that also. The studies basically are set up to demonstrate these new ID devices and may bridge the gap between ultra-high frequency and low frequency. We've heard about dual technologies and dual readers. We haven't tested those, and as far as I know, USDA has no projects with that technology at this time. So what we need is a good electronic ID device that everybody agrees on, or that can be used in different sectors of the industry, or different ID devices that can be used to get us there. I'm not telling anybody anything they don't know or that I haven't heard about for the last year. So we need to get that to the point where we select that official ID technology and make it standard. We need to decrease some of the variability that's out there. Industry's asking for it. We need it for regulatory purposes. It just makes sense. We also, in conjunction with that, need to increase our information technology abilities, expand our use of electronic ICVIs, and streamline our data sharing capabilities amongst each other. I talked yesterday about a portal system. We federally aren't interested in holding the industry's data. I don't want it for a lot of reasons. I don't want to be FOIA'd. I don't want to spend time digging that up because I'd have to create a whole new staff just to do that. What I'd like to do is build a portal system that I can get into the state's systems when I need it for disease purposes, when they need it, when they need to go across states. And we build that functionality. Interoperability, that's the word that's tossed around. It's really the ability to talk to each other. with this data. That's what we need. And that's where I think we need and where we're going to concentrate some of our funding. We need to clarify some of our information, such as what is direct to slaughter for movements. We need to enhance our monitoring and enforcement of our existing regulations. I need a workforce to do that. We're working on that. The interesting thing about the current administration is this is the first year I've had money to do things where I've been capped for who I can hire. So even though the money is there, I can't hire the personnel to get the work done because the administration is trying to show, and I agree with them, that we're shrinking government. We're trying to save your taxpayer dollars. But there's still work out there to be done. I talked about the rule to include tissue. I won't go through that again. Let me move on to the next slide. And I'll talk just briefly about the Mexico and Canada ID projects because many people have asked about that. Let me just take a minute here so I'm sounding like a chalkboard. So as many of you know, we're conducting pilot studies for collecting traceability data on cattle crossing the border of Canada and Mexico. I've already talked about the studies that we've done. We've done other studies with the types of electronic ID, both ultra high frequency and low frequency. So we're looking at Canada and Mexico. We're working in conjunction with them. These pilot studies are pretty much directed to see how we can work with the commerce of the systems that are already in place in these two countries. So we're looking at the ability to electronically collect, save, and retrieve data on imported animals, capturing their individual RFIDs or other ID that they may have on them, then uploading that information into our VSPS database. So the problem that we've observed with regard to traceability in cattle across the U.S. borders as a group are that, and this is something that state vets have brought to our attention, and I think we're working it out. Animals are often, they travel on what's called an international health certificate. That basically says they can come into the United States and they can move interstate. The problem that happens then is they resort these animals, they go to pens, they resort these animals, and they ship them all over the country. Federally, they're not really breaking a rule because they've moved them interstate legally to the point where they're of destination that's on the certificate. When they move then interstate from state to state, that's a violation. If we can catch them at that, we can do something about it. But the solution that we think and that the states have worked out is the individual states have to sit down and work with the brokers and ask them to create a new ICVI for interstate movement. Not use the interstate, the international, but to use an individual certificate of veterinary inspection that's an interstate movement. That's signed by an accredited vet that tells us where they're going once they're resorted. They're working on that. We do support efforts to continue that work. That's extremely important. And we can give them the data of where these animals came from, where they were loaded, where they were supposed to go. That's not always where they end up. Well, let's talk about Canada and Mexico. So we're looking at this VSPS uploading, looking at electronic ID. Remember, these are both low-frequency projects. And that's what we're working on with feeders. With the feeders, mostly we require to have the health certificate on the 9 CFR. The states, our 9 CFR with feeders doesn't require that our mandate, the movement requirements internationally, that they be traced to final destination. So we're relying on the states to help us with that. That's important. Okay. So let's talk about Canada. And first, there's 3 ports up on the northern border that were included in the initial pilot study. It was Sweetgrass, Dunseth, and Oroville. All ports that import feeders from Canada will be included in a study that's going to happen this fall. That study looked at low frequency, looked at scanning those animals without offloading them off the truck and how that could move at the speed of commerce. We'll be putting that report together shortly, but all reports are that went pretty well, and that the company that worked with us on that was very pleased. For Mexico, we conducted one ultra-high frequency project at the port of Santa Teresa and 4 low-frequency RFID pilots in 2017 at Santa Teresa, Nogales, and Eagle Pass and Del Rio. We're going to be putting that information together for distribution shortly also. I've asked my staff to put all of the RFID projects that we've done into a comprehensive report so people can see that, because we want you to see what we see, because you're going to be faced with some of these decisions. On May 1st, 2018, we will begin importing electronic exchange of individual animal ID beginning with the state of Chihuahua in Mexico. And we'll eventually expand that to other Mexican states over the next few months. So that in a nutshell is where we're at. There's some challenges out there for us, but I think there's some challenges out there for the industry too. And we just got to come together and figure out where we're going to go. I thank you for your time. I'll take questions if you have them. In the front.
William Avila with Valley Ag Software. Question for you regarding DNA sampling of an ISO. How do you see that evolving, or where do you see that taking place? Like where in the animal's life would that be done, for example?
We're asking FSIS to do that for us at the slaughter plant. Take that. See, a lot of times we'll get an ear tag, and they'll say, well, it's correlated to this lesion. They're not put together in the same box. And sometimes it's the wrong ear tag with the lesion. So if you take that ear tag and you take just a snippet of tissue, we can match what's on the ear tag with what the lesion is in the box. And believe it or not, there's been situations where they don't match. TB situations, all kinds of different disease programs. We need to have that match, because when I show up at a producer's facility, I want a solid match. And I was in the field. I know you walk onto the farm and you say, I got this ear tag, and it's your farm. I'm going to test you for brucellosis. You've got to get all your animals up. A lot of times they'll look at you and say, that's not my tag. That's not my animal. And sometimes they're right. The system isn't 100%. So we want to get as close as we can. If I've got an ID match and a genetic match, I'm pretty sure I'm in the right place. But we've had situations, believe it or not, where a black cow was sold, a red cow was the one that was put down on the block as tested, and neither the genetics on the red cow or the black cow match what's in the box. We got to do better than that, and that's why this will help us get there. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens. We want a solid trace, because we're dealing with high consequences for these producers when we show up at their door. We want that solid trace.
Stu Marsh with YTEX. You said that Congress had a concern with birth herd ID. Would you elaborate on that a little bit?
I think their concern is, we talked about a bookend system from the start of this program. We don't have it. So what they asked me is, well, if you don't have a bookend system, what do you have? What can you get back to the farm of origin? Sometimes. It's not 100%. Sometimes we tag them at the first point of concentration. Sometimes it gets mixed up. They want a system, and if we get into a high consequence disease, they want to be able to find out, not only for the animals in transit, but the animals on other farms, what's been exposed, what's moved, what farm, where was that animal from, where did that animal start out, and what channels did that animal go through in the process. So birth herd is something that, and that's something also that's being asked for in the trade sector. They want to know, at a minimum, where was the animal born, where was the animal's tag retired, at a minimum. If we can't provide that, then we have to go into special programs. And there are cattle industry folks that are in those special programs that provide that information. But you pay for that. I think if we had a good enough ID system, we could avoid some of that expense for our producers. I'd rather have them pay for some tags that, and I get this argument all the time too. I don't export, so I shouldn't have to tag my animals. Everybody exports. Every sector of agriculture exports. You may not do it yourself, but someone else is. So the economics of what happens when they send their product overseas is you make more money for your product here in the United States. That's just basic economics. So when I hear that, I just kind of cringe, and I say, well, yeah, everybody exports. NCBA has said that every beef animal sold in the United States for slaughter, they make about $300 extra because of exports. The swine industry has said I think it's $65 or $55 extra they make on every carcass because of exports. So there's a profit there. And now, here's the other piece I want you to swallow, and I do mean swallow. If we get FMD, 28% of our pork industry goes overseas. Now it's going to stay here because nobody's going to want it, at least not at first, till we can prove freedom from sectors, freedom from regionalization, whatever we have to do for EPI to tell the rest of the world, even though we had it here, we didn't have it over here. And will they accept that? So 28% of our production will stay. Imagine what that'll do to pork prices. So we have some concerns with the, and ADT goes right along with these diseases of high consequences. It's extremely important that we prepare and we be ready. Otherwise, we're going to be dealt a knockout punch. We're already getting punched in the stomach a little bit on trade because we can't get in some of the markets because our system. We're one of the, I talked just yesterday, one of 2 countries in the world that, major countries that export that don't have a mandatory ID system. So we can do better. I answered your question and added a little controversy on with that. So, next question.
I just wanted to congratulate you on your approach, your thought process. I'm from Canada. I'm with the Beef Information Exchange System, and we weren't that forward thinking in the beginning, so we just had our mandatory system. But we've since had to develop a secondary system, a value-added system, and that's who I work with. We have full integration with mandatory system, but conceivably you could have one system with different tiers. So I just want to say that I really think everything that you're saying, I'd like everybody in the room to really listen, and a data sharing platform that people can put information into with portals is the way to go. And we worked with McDonald's on their Verified Sustainable Beef pilot project, and people said it couldn't be done, but you can track from the farm of origin right through, and we've got a system similar to yours. The animals move 3 to 4 times in their lifetime, and we were able to track animals and work with McDonald's on a mass balanced sustainable beef program. So we're now in a secondary pilot. If anybody wants to visit with me about it and how we're tracking and tracing, I'd be more than happy to do so.
Let me get your card before you leave. There's a few people in the back, too, that could use our card. I appreciate that comment. Thank you very much. There's a lot of smart people working on this, and I just listen, and we try to make sure we make the right decisions.
Morning, Dr. Shere. Thanks for your comments.
I won't take a question from that individual. He can sit down. Paul McGraw, Wisconsin. I cut my teeth in Wisconsin, so just so you know, that's home for me. Go ahead,
Jack, I appreciate your comments and that we want to move the industry forward and the industry bringing these things to you. And I know one of the work groups last year was the state, federal, and industry traceability, and you touched on a lot of the recommendations. One of those recommendations was to push for cattle that need to be identified, push that requirement back to the farm of origin, consider that interstate commerce once they leave the farm. The other one was I was involved in a Seneca A working group with a lot of the swine industry, and out of that group came the recommendation that USDA go ahead and make it mandatory for Prem ID for cull sows and boars going to slaughter. So I guess my question is, what does it take to, how much more industry do we need to get support to get some of those rules implemented, and what would that look like? Because we've had kind of joint groups that have come up with some things that I think the farm of origin for interstate commerce would go a long ways toward us helping that bookend.
Yeah.
And if you can do it nationally, it makes it a lot easier for me to enforce it locally, because if I make a rule in Wisconsin, it might just put my markets at a disadvantage.
Understood. So the question is, what more do I need? I really appreciate the industry groups that get together, especially with our state vets and the work that's being put into some of the project work that we're getting. We need that. And I was just talking to an individual about a project before this. I said, I just need the data. I need the justification. I need the idea that this is where people really are and where we want to be, so that when I write a rule, and I try to, and I just told you, getting rules through right now is very difficult. The industry can't oppose it. Individuals can. It has to be something that I get rules through still with this organization, because the industry is asking for them. They want them published. And I can move a rule like that through, and I can move it through rapidly. But if it's something that, where I'll use the TB rule. We spend 7 years writing it, and then nobody likes it. That won't work, and I can't help you from that standpoint. But that's what everybody wants, and that's what they tell me they want. And I can get enough folks in the fold where I know that's going to, because I get asked this all the time, what's the opposition? When we sit down and we talk about these rules. And that's from the higher-ups. What's the opposition? Who's going to come out against this? What do you expect? And so if we write rules that are going to move the industry forward, that are going to help, then they don't go through opposition. They'll go through. So that's what I need, Paul. And that's kind of where things sit. Previous administrations, this current administration is about helping the industry, helping move product, helping sell things, and making the industry profitable. And I'm all for that. So if we can make rules that will do that and won't have opposition, we'll move forward. Okay? Thank you very much. Have a good day.